The summer of 216 BC was a season of fear and foreboding in Rome. Everywhere people looked, signs of doom seemed to appear. Stones rained down from the sky onto the Aventine Hill, startling citizens and priests alike. In the countryside of Sabine, sacred statues of the gods were defaced and smeared with blood, an act that no one could explain. At Caere, the earth itself seemed to bleed, with streams of red oozing from the ground, and even the waters of the hot springs ran deep crimson. Lightning struck the Campus Martius, felling men where they stood. Rumors spread like wildfire. Surely the gods were sending a warning, a signal of disaster that threatened the very heart of the Republic amidst this chaos. Hannibal Barca, the brilliant Carthaginian general, had continued to evade and outmaneuver Rome. Each campaign revealed his cunning. He anticipated Roman moves, exploited their weaknesses, and used the terrain to his advantage. Yet, for all the fear he inspired, the Romans were about to learn a brutal truth. No matter how bad things seem, they can always get far worse. Today, we turn our attention to the battle that has echoed through history, the Battle of Cannae. The Roman Senate had every reason to be terrified. Hannibal had already humiliated them repeatedly on their own soil. Their forces had been crushed at Ticinus, Trebia, and Trasimene, and their plans undermined at Ager Falernus. Only the careful, deliberate tactics of Quintus Fabius Maximus, the man known as the Delayer, had prevented another total catastrophe at Geronium. Hannibal's genius lay not in luck, but in strategy. He understood the minds of his enemies, drawing out their arrogance and overconfidence, turning their desire for swift glory into traps. Rome could not tolerate this threat any longer. As Hannibal moved into the fertile plains of Apulia, the Senate assembled its largest army yet. 8 legions of Roman citizens, paired with an equal number of allied troops, totaling almost 89,000 soldiers. At the helm were the year's consuls, Aemilius Paulus and Terentius Varro, charged with a mission of supreme importance, to corner Hannibal and annihilate his army once and for all. But this mission was only part of a larger strategy. Hannibal's power rested on 4 main pillars: the loyalty of southern Italian allies, the manpower and wealth of Iberia, support from Carthage, and the backing of Gallic tribes in Cisalpine Gaul. By marching into Apulia, Paulus and Varro aimed at the first of these pillars, attempting to cut off Hannibal from potential allies and crush the foundation of his campaign. Every decision, every move, now carried the weight of Rome's survival on its shoulders. Yet the Senate had not ignored the other 3 pillars of Hannibal's power. The second pillar, his access to resources and reinforcements from Iberia, was already being challenged. The Scipio brothers were keeping Hasdrubal Barca busy, preventing him from sending troops to aid Hannibal. As for the third pillar, Rome had struck at Carthage itself. In late 217 BC, a fleet of 120 quinqueremes under Gnaeus, Servilius Geminus, sailed for northern Africa. Geminus landed first on the island of Meninx, then crossed to the mainland, where the Roman marines began a campaign of pillaging. But discipline faltered, and the Romans walked into a series of Carthaginian ambushes. After losing roughly 1,000 men, they were forced to retreat in haste to their ships, leaving a trail of destruction behind. The fourth pillar, the support of Hannibal's Gallic allies, fell to Paulus and Varro. They raised 2 additional legions and placed them under the command of Praetor Lucius Postumius, who was tasked with marching into Cisalpine Gaul to devastate the lands of the Boii tribe, allies of Hannibal. The hope was that such a show of force would encourage the Gauls serving with Hannibal to desert. As Postumius advanced along the Adriatic coast, he recruited more allied troops, swelling his ranks to 25,000 by July 216 BC. Rome had nearly 115,000 soldiers deployed against Hannibal across 2 theaters of operation. Following tradition, Paulus and Varro shared command of the massive army on alternating days. Their approaches could not have been more different. Paulus was experienced and cautious, a strategist who measured every move. Varro, a young homo novus, was ambitious, impetuous, and eager for personal glory. Their differences set the stage for the events to come. Before advancing into Apulia, the army set up camp. Paulus addressed the troops, speaking with a calm but commanding authority. "Men of the army, we have every advantage for victory, yet the true difference lies in your resolve. You fight not for strangers, but for yourselves, your country, your families. In this battle, we do not risk merely legions, but the very existence of Rome. Enter it with full conviction. Your courage alone will secure our fate." The next morning, after breaking camp, the consuls led their men on a 2-day march to the vicinity of Cannae. As always, Hannibal had chosen his ground with care. The village offered ample grain stores and flat terrain ideal for cavalry maneuvers. The Romans set their camp about 10 kilometers from the Carthaginian position. Paulus sensed danger and urged caution, suggesting a site less favorable to cavalry. But it was Varro's day of command, and he insisted on moving closer to the enemy. Hannibal responded quickly, sending skirmishers and cavalry to probe the Romans. Initially, his troops gained ground, but the heavy Roman infantry held firm, forming a solid line. The Carthaginians lost 1,700 men in the encounter, while Roman casualties numbered just 100. At daybreak, Roman scouts returned with startling news. The Carthaginian camp appeared abandoned, and its riches seemed ripe for the taking. Excitement rippled through the Roman ranks. Soldiers clamored to plunder the enemy's stores, while Varro, full of youthful impatience and thirst for glory, eagerly supported them. Paulus, however, urged caution. He dispatched Prefect Marius Statilius to examine the camp, wary of the potential for a trap. Statilius returned quickly, his expression grim. He warned that something was amiss, that the camp might not be as empty as it appeared. Varro dismissed the warning without hesitation. The prospect of easy spoils and a decisive strike blinded him to prudence. He gave the order to march into the camp. At that tense moment, 2 Roman slaves, captured months earlier by the Numidians and recently escaped, rushed to the consuls with dire news. Hannibal's entire army lay hidden in ambush on a nearby ridge, ready to strike. For once, Hannibal had been outwitted, and he graciously acknowledged the temporary setback, returning to his camp without pursuing the Romans immediately. Yet he faced a pressing problem. His food supplies were dwindling. He needed to draw the Romans into battle quickly, lest his own army weaken from hunger and fatigue. Paulus, ever cautious, refused to be baited. Over the next 2 days, he divided his forces carefully. 2/3 of the army encamped on the western bank of the river Aufidus, while the remaining third, under Varro, camped on the eastern bank, about 10 stades from Hannibal's position. Sensing a dip in morale among his troops, Hannibal addressed them with his famed eloquence and charisma. He reminded them of the stakes. "Give thanks to the gods, for they have brought the enemy to our land because victory has been prepared for us. Give thanks to me, for having compelled the enemy to fight in a place of our advantage. The cities and their wealth await, and if we win, all Italy will be ours. Freed from hardship and masters of Roman riches, you will rise to lead the world." After the speech, Barca dismissed his men, ordered them to break camp, and entrenched his forces on the western bank of the Aufidus. The next day, a tense, eerie calm settled over the plains of Cannae. Both armies waited, nerves frayed by the uncertainty of what was to come. As Polybius later wrote, "There is nothing more intolerable to mankind than suspense. When a thing is once decided, men can but endure whatever out of the catalogue of evils it is their misfortune to undergo." Hannibal, aware of the mounting tension, took steps to provoke his enemy. He sent Numidian cavalry to harass Roman watering parties on the eastern bank. Knowing that Varro commanded the smaller camp there, Varro, already impatient and eager for battle, took the bait. His desire for a fight inflamed the troops, who chafed under the delay and were eager to prove themselves. On August 1st, Hannibal escalated the provocation. He moved his men onto the eastern bank of the Aufidus and ordered his Numidians to harass the Romans further. Varro could no longer restrain himself. It was time to fight. Paulus attempted to temper his colleagues' impatience, but he soon recognized the inevitability of battle. According to Livy, Paulus stated that he would himself be guiltless of all blame, but would share in all the consequences. Another day passed. On August 2nd, it was Varro's turn to command, and he positioned the bulk of the Roman army on the eastern bank. The two armies now faced each other across the plain of Cannae. The Romans to the north, the Carthaginians to the south. To the west, the Aufidus River formed a natural boundary. To the east, hilly terrain enclosed the battlefield. Paulus commanded a contingent of Roman cavalry on the right wing, along the river, prepared for the confrontation that would soon decide the fate of Rome itself. The heart of the Roman line was packed tight with heavy infantry, arranged in dense maniples, so deep that each formation stretched several ranks back for every man in the front. Leading this powerful center were Marcus Attilius and Gnaeus Servilius, both former consuls now serving as proconsuls. To their left stood the Italic allied cavalry under Varro's command, while a thin screen of light infantry guarded the entire front. Altogether, the Roman army boasted around 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, a wall of steel and determination. To any observer, it looked like an unstoppable force, a massive fist poised to crush Hannibal in a single devastating blow. Hannibal, however, understood the balance of power differently. Though he was outnumbered 2-1, his cavalry was superior in both skill and spirit. If Rome's strength lay in numbers, his lay in cunning from west to east. His troops formed a battle line of remarkable complexity. Closest to the Aufidus stood his Iberian and Gallic cavalry, commanded by Hasdrubal, not his brother but a trusted lieutenant, facing Paulus's horsemen. Next came a column of elite Libyan infantry, armored and equipment captured from Roman soldiers in previous battles. At the center of Hannibal's formation stood a broad crescent of Iberian and Gallic infantry, deliberately bulging outward toward the enemy. Hannibal himself, alongside his brother Mago, commanded this center, where the trap would begin. On the far side of the crescent, another Libyan column waited, hidden just behind the curve. Beyond them, to the east, Maharbal and his swift Numidian cavalry held the flank opposite Varro's horsemen. The front was covered by Balearic slingers and nimble javelin throwers, their task to harass and confuse the Roman line before the clash. In total, Hannibal commanded about 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. But his true power was not in numbers, it was in design. The Libyan columns stood just out of sight behind the bulging center, ready to spring forward when the moment came. As the sun blazed overhead, a hot southern wind kicked up the dry soil, driving clouds of dust into the Romans' faces. The Carthaginian general could not control the weather, but fortune smiled upon him. The wind masked his movements and blinded his enemy. Everything depended on one gamble, drawing the proud Roman legions into his apparent weakness, only to close the jaws of his hidden trap. The stage was set. The fates themselves seemed to weave the moment. Nona spinning the threads of countless lives, Decima measuring them, and Morta, the final sister, readying her shears to cut them short. The battle opened in a storm of dust and noise as Hannibal's light infantry charged forward, clashing with the Roman skirmishers. Slingstones and javelins darkened the air, but neither side could gain an advantage. Soon, both withdrew through their own ranks, making way for the heavier troops behind them. Then came the thunder of hooves. Hasdrubal, commanding the Iberian and Gallic cavalry, led his riders against the Roman horse under Paulus. The Aufidus River hemmed them in on one side, leaving no room for clever maneuvers. The cavalry lines crashed together in a savage melee. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the battlefield turned into chaos. Riders dragged each other from the saddle and fought on foot among the fallen mounts. Gradually, Hasdrubal's men began to push the Romans back, their ferocity and numbers on horseback proving decisive. The Roman right wing broke, fleeing north along the river. Hasdrubal's riders pursued them relentlessly, cutting them down from behind until the Roman cavalry was utterly destroyed. At the same time, the heavy infantry in the center began their advance. The ground trembled as the Roman legions surged forward in dense ranks, their shields glinting under the sun. In the middle stood Hannibal's Iberian and Gallic troops, urged on by Hannibal and his brother Mago. The Carthaginians fought bravely, holding the line as long as they could. but the sheer weight of the Roman advance pressed them back. Slowly, the bulging Carthaginian crescent began to bend inward, turning concave under the pressure. The Romans pushed harder, driving into what they believed was a collapsing line. Their formation tightened into a wedge, crushing forward with unstoppable force. To the north, the other wing of Roman cavalry faced the fearsome Numidian horse under Hannibal. The Numidians used their trademark hit-and-run tactics, darting in, throwing volleys of javelins, and galloping away before the Romans could strike back. Then, a group of about 500 Numidians appeared to defect to the Romans. Welcomed into their lines and sent to the rear, they soon revealed their deception. Drawing hidden blades, they fell upon the Romans from behind, slashing down horses and men in a burst of chaos. Trapped between Hannibal's attack in front and the false deserters behind, the Italic cavalry panicked. They broke and fled for the safety of their camp, chased by the Numidians. Varro, surrounded and nearly cut off, barely escaped with a handful of horsemen. The other consul, Paulus, was not so fortunate. Wounded but defiant, he joined the center of the infantry line, urging his men forward. Bloodied and exhausted, the Romans pressed into the heart of the Carthaginian formation. The enemy center seemed to collapse at last. Thousands of Romans flooded into the gap, shouting victory. But what they believed to be triumph was the final movement of Hannibal's trap. On both flanks, the concealed Libyan infantry suddenly pivoted inward, closing around the advancing Romans. The jaws of the Carthaginian pincer snapped shut. Chaos took hold. Moments earlier, the Roman legions had fought as an indomitable machine, their shields locked and standards gleaming in the sun. Now, that order disintegrated. The compact, disciplined mass dissolved into confusion as the Libyan infantry pressed inward from both flanks. Men who moments before had fought shoulder to shoulder suddenly found themselves hemmed in, slashed at from all directions by warriors wearing Roman armor, spoils from earlier defeats. From the front, the Iberian and Gallic infantry, having recovered from their feigned retreat, surged forward once more. The biconsular army, once the embodiment of Roman might, had become a trapped multitude, a writhing, desperate mass, crushed within a tightening ring of Carthaginian steel. And yet, the worst was still to come. On the wings, Hasdrubal and Hannibal had completed their devastating work. Having routed both contingents of Roman cavalry, they resisted the temptation to pursue their fleeing foes. Instead, they regrouped, turned their horses about, and thundered back toward the battlefield. Their charge into the Roman rear sealed the fate of the legions. In that instant, Hannibal, through his unerring discipline and the genius of his lieutenants, accomplished the unthinkable. The total encirclement of an army twice the size of his own across the river. A desperate subplot unfolded. Before the battle, Consul Paulus had left 10,000 men in the Roman camp on the western bank of the Aufidus. Following his earlier orders, they sallied forth to assault the Carthaginian camp. At first, the assault went well, but the defenders rallied with grim determination. Hannibal, perceiving the threat, swiftly crossed the river and took command in person. Under his direction, the Romans were driven back, their ranks shattered, 2,000 were cut down, and the survivors fled into their camp, only to find themselves surrounded and trapped. Back on the plain, Paulus still fought bloodied and gasping. He urged his men to hold firm, to break through if they could. Around him lay the bodies of centurions, tribunes, and even the veteran proconsuls. Attilius and Servilius tribune Gnaeus Lentulus found him slumped and bleeding, pleading for him to flee. Do not make this battle worse by the death of a consul. There is grief enough already. Paulus looked up through the dust and blood. Go, he answered. Tell the Senate to fortify Rome and prepare for the enemy. As for me, let me die among my slaughtered soldiers. And die he did. Consul Paulus fell amidst a sea of Roman dead. The plain of Cannae had become a slaughterhouse morta. The third of the parquet had finished her grim work, cutting the threads of tens of thousands of lives. Within the tightening Carthaginian ring, men could scarcely breathe, let alone fight. The cries of the dying drowned beneath the clash of steel and the thunder of hooves, until the field was silent, save for the moans of the wounded. Of Rome's 6,000 cavalry, barely 70 escaped with Varro to Venusia, some 60 kilometers to the south. Another 300 fled to nearby towns. The infantry suffered even worse. Ancient sources differ slightly, but both Polybius and Livy agree that no more than 3,000 escaped the field. Nearly 70,000 Romans and allies were slain in that deadly encirclement, an entire generation cut down in a single day. The loss shattered the Republic. Almost every family in Italy would mourn a husband, father, son, or brother. The state's leadership had been gutted. One consul, two proconsuls, the former co-dictator Marcus Minucius, 29 military tribunes, 80 senators, and countless praetors lay among the fallen. Hannibal, by contrast, had lost only about 5,700 men. Yet the tragedy was not quite complete. Two Roman camps still stood, the larger on the western bank of the Aufidus, now surrounded, and a smaller one nearby. As night fell, the trapped soldiers of the larger camp sent word begging their comrades to unite for a breakout. Only Tribune Publius, Sempronius Tuditanus, and 600 men accepted the call. Under the cover of darkness, shields locked, they pushed through volleys of Numidian javelins and reached the larger camp-gathering survivors. Tuditanus led a desperate march toward Canusium. At dawn, the rest, between 8 and 15,000, were captured. As the sun rose over Cannae on August 3rd, 216 BC, even Hannibal's soldiers were horrified by what lay before them. The battlefield stretched endlessly, covered with Roman and Carthaginian bodies. The smell of blood and dust hung in the air, and the silence was heavier than the sound of battle itself. Livy later described the scene with haunting detail. Some were found still alive, their legs and tendons cut, begging their captors to end their pain. Others had buried their heads in the ground, choosing to suffocate rather than suffer longer. But the most shocking sight was that of a Numidian soldier dragged from beneath a dead Roman, his nose and ears torn off. The Roman, too weak to use his sword, had died biting his enemy in fury. Even in total defeat, the Romans showed their unbreakable spirit. They might lose battles, but never their courage. This fierce will to fight, even in despair, would one day bring them victory. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon so you never miss our next journey into history's greatest battles.